And it's wonderful to be here in this audience, in this auditorium from Geronimo Martin, because they're actually one of the Unilever partners in Portugal. So if they are successful, we are successful. So I'm glad to see that we're actually using this facility. So estoy feliz por estar de volta a Portugal y a participar de esta importante conferencia. I know there are some people not speaking Portuguese, so I'll go with my talk in English if you don't mind. But what I want to tell you is what you're doing here is absolutely important, because what the Jornal de Negócios has put in place is very much needed, bringing leaders together to help shape a better future for Portugal, a better future for Europe, a better future beyond. And you're doing that here at the Nova School of Business and Economics. We were talking yesterday a little bit over dinner, the success of the school in its rankings, in its attraction of students, and because this is an effort that I believe needs all of us, and it's glad to see that it isn't led by one sector or one country or one generation, but it involves each and all of us. So this gathering is critical, what you're doing here today and yesterday, because it's only by bringing us together in this environment, which is not an easy environment, that we can actually benefit from each other's ideas, where we can build trust, where purpose is shared, and hopefully seeds of systems change are starting to take root. And as I will argue, we need a lot of systems change there. It's a challenging time to be a leader. This is a very complex and volatile world. We're living probably through the most profound changes that we've ever seen, certainly in our lifetimes. I don't think the changes that we're seeing now have been seen since about the 1930s, for those of you who still remember what that was. But we're going through it again. It's an environmental collapse. It's a geopolitical fragmentation. It's a rising protectionism. We see regulatory uncertainties, supply chain disruptions. At the same time, widening inequality, eroding trust in institutions, technological accelerations, adding a further dimension to this. And obviously, when we need it most, a dangerous vacuum of leadership. Some people call it a polycrisis or a perma-crisis, where so many factors actually come together at the same time that they start to multiply, if you want to, and create a period of uncertainty that will certainly last for, I would argue myself, at least this decade, if not beyond. It's a call of leadership. It's a test of leadership. It's not just of strategy, but of values-based leadership, of long-term thinking. It's a test of courage, if we can stay the course. And leadership, as you well know, means making the right decisions, or trying to make the right decisions in a time of fog. It means navigating the contradictions that we're seeing, the backlashes that we have to deal with, the short-term pressures that are now building up, and doing all of that while holding this longer-term view, certainly being values-driven. And many actually struggle with that, and we've seen enough of that in the newspapers lately. The economist Keynes said it very well when he said, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones. I think we're still struggling to give up the way we were doing business in the 20th century with the new environment that we're actually finding in the 21st century. Historians actually start to describe this as the birth of the fifth industrial order. I don't know if it will be the fifth industrial order, because we really have a choice right now. It's much more serious than that, a choice between chaos, serious chaos, or a better organized system than what we came from. But you're all familiar with the age of the empires, when we were all conquering the world. And then we got the Westphalian system, which is more the sovereignty that we see coming out of that. We have the post-World War II liberal order that you're familiar with, the neoliberal area, which was more dominated by markets and finance, where we just came from. And now it's a multipolar, contested, divisive world. It will definitely not go back to this unipolar order that we came from. It's a system where new coalitions are being formed, where parts of the world are growing up and being more mature. But what is interesting is each of these world orders, if you look at them, is coming faster and faster at us. The first one took millennials, then it lasted centuries, and now we're in the period of decades. So when this old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born, it is time actually for monsters to grow. And you see quite a lot of them in the world states right now abusing that situation. It's undoubtedly a period of chaos. I found this cartoon, which probably captures it well where we are. It's a world of mixed signals, confusion, contradictions. 1 minute you're applauded, the next minute you're attacked. You're expected to cut costs, increase wages, report more, say less, and have climate strategies that can please everybody. The way that it's going back and forth, this one obviously referring to some of the US orders and tariffs and all these things, is enormous. This isn't just noise that we're seeing right now. It's actually a breakdown in trust. It's a breakdown in direction. It's a breakdown in governance. And nothing more clear than Trump in the US with his tariffs. I found this little photo, which I thought said it very well. But this is what you soon will see in the stores, you know? For most people, this is the immediate threat. I talk to a lot of CEOs, and all of them say, I'm just so busy with trying to figure out how to redo my value chains, how to deal with the disruptions in the supply chain, how to see what this means in terms of the demand signals and the supply possibilities. Unfortunately, it's pulling most of the companies in the world back to the short term, at the expense, actually, of sticking to the long-term issues and the long-term vision. There is obviously a much deeper issue happening here than just the tariffs alone. I think this is just a little bit of a tip of the iceberg. And what is important to me is that we don't lose the bigger picture. What is happening across the world is actually a rise of populism. It's surging in nearly every country you go to. Incumbents are voted out everywhere, with a few exceptions. We've seen those exceptions recently in Singapore, in Canada with Mark Carney, and in Australia. Interestingly, the elections in Australia and Canada are directly attributed, the results, to Trump attacking those countries. So I think people rallying together for their own independence. But frankly, in all countries, populism is on the rise, including in this part of Europe that you're well familiar with. So Trump is not the problem itself. Trump, in my opinion, is a symptom of the problem. These people understand very well how to tap into the real anxieties that people have. Anxieties around immigration, anxieties around inflation, anxieties around inequality. And to some extent, they're right. The sense that change is being done to people and not for most of the people in the world is a very genuine concern. If you look at income disparities, what you see here, that most people actually have seen limited progress as wealth was created over the past few decades. And it's increasingly concentrated in a few hands. I call it little islands of prosperity in a growing sea of poverty. Many actually don't believe any longer that their children will be better off than they do. And there's many reasons to believe that they are right. According to Edelman, who does always the trust survey, we have seen the lowest trust in institutions across Europe. Again, it fell by about 6 points this year. Confidence in governments, in media, and also in business, may I add, is weakening in nearly all places in the world. People have lost trust, and when people lose trust, they turn to extremes. And those who give you the easier answers, which often is the populists. I've often said that in a system where too many people feel that they're left behind or not participating, these systems will ultimately rebel against itself. We're operating in an environment that is now far more fragile, far more fragmented, and far more fatigued, if you want to, than many people would admit. So as we are in the challenges, it's also an enormous opportunity, I believe, to lead with courage, to lead with clarity, to lead with confidence. We're falling behind on the Sustainable Development Goals. You're well familiar with that. Your Secretary General is Portuguese, and he's actively supporting that. But the financial crisis, COVID, what we now see with this new world order is actually derailing us. There are only very few of the Sustainable Development Goals that are on track. It doesn't mean that they're as valid today as they were yesterday. I think they're even more valid now. How to irreversibly eradicate poverty and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. But we have a job to be done. If you really look at the 6 mass extinction that we are now going through, as I was explaining yesterday during dinner, this wonderful world is 4.5 billion years old. If you put it on a scale of 24 hours, human beings have only been here in the last 2 seconds. The Industrial Revolution was only probably in a nanosecond of this period of time. So we've been here for a very short period of time. But during that period of time, we've destroyed quite a lot. We've destroyed about 50% of the Earth's forests, 85% of the Earth's wetlands, 60% of the wildlife. In fact, some people will say that in the last 50 years, 70% of the world's biodiversity has been destroyed. We've done more in these last 2 seconds than we've done in any part of history before. What gives us the right to do that? We're currently losing species at a rate of 100 to 1,000 times more than we did before. I don't know if you want to be part of that. I certainly don't. People call this the 6th mass extinction. I think it's bigger than that. And we're playing with these planetary boundaries. You're well familiar with that. This is just a chart from 2009 to 2023. So we're talking 14 years. That's nothing. We have 9 critical boundaries that decide the health of the planet Earth. Think about things like climate, nitrogen level, think about water, think about land and all these things. So, and they're all related. I don't have to explain that to you. But about 6 of these 9, we have now crossed what is called the minimal acceptable level. And not surprising, Mother Nature is sending us invoices on a daily basis. Just in the last 2 decades, we've incurred over $3 trillion of weather-related disasters as a result of this, according to Swiss Re. $3 trillion. Better spend that money to avoid it in the first place. In fact, we need to spend twice as much, as I will talk later, $6 trillion. But we're willing to incur these costs whilst we're paralyzed to take action. The California wildfires, I took this from the internet, but it's 10% of the California GDP was destroyed. To some extent, obviously, a wealthy part of the world, but the world is burning in many places. And Mother Nature, I hope you agree with me, doesn't really care who's in the White House. It doesn't really matter to her. We're on track, if you want to 2.9 degrees. That's what the estimate is currently. We are just passing about the 1.5 degrees. But what needs to be understood is there is no future in 2.9 degrees. The system doesn't work anymore. Our Earth systems will stop functioning in the sense. It will lead to our extinction. Mother Earth will be there, by the way. It will recuperate. It will take 150, 200 years, but it will recuperate. We'd be very happy if we're not there. This is a total collapse if we go to these levels. The IPCC, for example, just look very simply at a 2-degree level. Just at 2 degrees, between 1.5 and 2 degrees, because these are exponential scales. We're seeing much greater heat extremes, threatening agriculture, human health, ecosystems. We're seeing twice the biodiversity loss of what we see at 1.5 degrees. Major risks for food or water security, especially in regions like Africa, Middle East or South Asia, will become impossible to actually live. And then the tipping points. We're close to tipping points already on the coral reefs, on the Amazons, on the Arctics. And it's starting to be difficult to recuperate once you get these tipping points. Fires in the Amazon last year were the size of Italy. So swatches of the planet have become totally uninhabitable. And already today, and in 2070, what this is showing, that will actually result probably in close to 1 billion more people swarming the planet because they can't live there anymore. I was at Change Now last week in Paris, a very good event organized, and they had a container there that they had equipped to be in for at 50 degrees Celsius. But they put the temperature there, took people in for that experience, let people climb stairs, let people do tests. Your cognitive skills go down. But very quickly, after 10 minutes, people were asking to leave the container. Couldn't stay in it. Yet there are many parts in the world already now that people live with 50 degrees Celsius. Now, this is important for business also, that that we think about this, not only just for future generations. So this chart is actually a very good chart that you might want to look at, because it tells you what people, when people were born, and what they have to deal with, and where the risks are very high, intermediate, low, or very low in terms of the climate scenario. So you see most of us that are probably entering the 50s, 60s, 70s might just deal with the beginning of that, and it's already very bad. The people that we're putting currently on Earth will have to deal with something enormous if we don't take action. That's actually why more than half of the people that are of childbearing age nowadays in the world decide not to have children anymore. In many countries, that's already the case. So there's an enormous responsibility that we have, not only for future generations, but if you run a business as well. I always say to people, there's no business on a dead planet. It's as simple as that. Within this environment, you cannot succeed. In Unilever already, when I was running it, I had hundreds of millions of extra costs because of supply chain disruptions as a result of climate change. Now, at a moment that we need to accelerate, we unfortunately see a backlash. We see a backlash on ESG, where you have less proposals, where you have people becoming silent. You see also a backlash on DE&I, the whole diversity thing. It's in the US, but don't be mistaken. I think part of that is also in Europe as well. So, in fact, cynically, a few months ago, we were hard-pressed to find a major CEO who didn't want to go on television to talk about the importance of ESG. Now you throw a stone and you hit probably 5 of them that are totally silent. The less ESG shareholder resolutions, less support from the financial community, less joint efforts like the Net Zero Banking Alliance or other things. This is where we've moved rapidly from perhaps too much of an extreme of greenwashing to an absolute green hushing. We saw that companies were exaggerating, I think, their sustainability stories to a great extent to bolster their credentials. There was definitely some of that taking place. But now it has been rapidly replaced by a fear to speak up. It's actually bizarre that there is a terrible political backlash for companies now that were going out of the way to say all the good things that they're doing. Now, within a few weeks' time, they're going out of the way to be quiet, to talk about the good things that they're doing. It doesn't make sense, in fact. It doesn't make sense, especially now, at a time that we need to speak up. So let's be honest, when it comes to ESG, I think many people, or DE&I, many people that work for these companies, or many people in the world are starting to ask themselves, if you see these CEOs switching 180 degrees within 2 minutes, were they serious about it in the first place? What company am I really working for? Are these values really aligned with my own values, why I joined? So the backlash we're seeing, I believe, is a serious lack of leadership. Now, let me be clear. It's not the end of ESG, what we're seeing here. It's a serious fault of leadership. It's a credibility test in anything else. The ESG itself, or the DE&I efforts undoubtedly are being slowed down, but the direction that we're on and the direction we need to take in most of the companies is definitely to address these issues. And good companies that stay the course, I believe, will be getting rewarded for that. Companies that waver will quickly pay a high price for this. The worst thing in all of this is not saying anything, not participating. Silence here is complicity to the crime that is being committed. I think CEOs need to understand that. This is Martin Luther King, who had a great quote, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. I think that's really what we're seeing now happening in many of the companies. So my question to you is very clearly, very simply, what story do we want to live in? We have a choice to be made. Either we live in a world, as the National Geographic says, how we lost the planet. Is that the story we want to live in? Or do we want to live in a story that says how we saved the world? I know what I would pick. And we can recognize that among these uncertainties, there will be powerful forces in any change process of this magnitude that are trying to stifle this progress. That shouldn't be a surprise to us. But the leading businesses are adapting. They're adapting to these new environments. They're scaling these new technologies. They're reallocating capital to this future. They're forming new alliances to make this possible. And these businesses are getting rewarded. So what we're seeing here is actually the majority of businesses, despite what you hear in the papers of we're going backwards, the majority of the businesses understand what they need to do to be successful in the future. They're still moving. This was the Financial Times from last week. 3/4 of businesses surveyed in this article are actually stepping up their investment in renewables or electrifying by 2035 or sooner. In fact, if you talk to 90% of the CFOs who make investments, they plan to invest more in sustainability. So the real story we live in is that we're moving forward. We're not moving backwards, unlike what some people want you to believe. If you look at wind and solar, this is an example of the progress we're making in the EU itself. Wind and solar have scaled up faster than any other electricity sources. We have, in 2025, it's expected to more than double our solar capacity in the EU in 3 years' time. We are moving. We're not falling backwards. We see major banks making announcements. JP Morgan Chase, $2.5 trillion investing over the next 10 years to support this climate or sustainable solutions. We see financial institutions in Europe actually putting more money behind fighting climate change. 60 trillion in assets are now being allocated to this. So despite the story out there of silence, despite the story out there that we're moving backwards, we actually see it moving. But the unfortunate thing is we're just not moving it fast enough. Here you see what happens with tipping points in the history of industry, of steel versus iron, of shipping, sailing ships versus steamships. What you see in all of these history, gas lights versus electricity, or coal versus gas, in any of these tipping points, what you see is it takes a little bit, but then once you get to a tipping point, it starts to take off very quickly. And we're already seeing that as well in the green revolution. Green energy investments doubled versus fossil fuel. In fact, we were spending $2.1 trillion last year. Enormous investments. Electric vehicle sales, I had a question about that yesterday. They're multiplied 5-fold since 2020. We continue to grow quite fast, the electric vehicle market. In China, it's passing for the first time this year about the 50% mark if you take electric vehicles and hybrids. When people say we're not moving, it's false also. There are 47 countries in the world that are ahead of the Paris Agreement. There are 7 countries in the world that actually are totally decarbonized already. So we are moving, there's no question about it. And there's no better example to tell you that than Portugal itself. It's a very important case in point. Despite this global volatility that we live in, you've doubled down on the transition to green energy. You have 61% of your energy actually was renewables a year ago. You have major investments in green hydrogen, some companies here. You're accelerating the upgrades of the grid and co-funding with the EU, the Next Generation Fund that is helping you finance that. But you're investing in the future. I think you're well placed as a country, more so than others. As a result of that, more than 5 billion of green investments have gone into this country. I think it's been one of the engines of economic growth that you have seen. There's no question about the major investments that are happening here that are not only setting the pace for Portugal, but it also sets an example for the rest of the world. What you can do with right policies, with right partnerships, and keeping the right purpose. It's not easy, but it's certainly an example of doing it. So the question we now have is out with the old, in with the new. Look at some of the tipping points that are starting to happen in the market. Now, the key thing once more is leadership. When I took over in Unilever in 2008, it was the height of the financial crisis. It wasn't very easy. The company was also in serious trouble. But we took a longer term view. We said, where is this world going? What do we need to do to position ourselves properly in that? It isn't easy, these transitions. It takes a lot of hard work. But doing that for 10 years and putting a sustainable model in place gave us a 300% shareholder return. We showed that investing against the future is better than holding on to the past. We see that with solar. You look at solar capacity here, it's exploding. Countries like Pakistan, for example, are electrifying in a period of less than a decade. Very fast growth of solar. We're seeing it now happening in Africa and some of the countries. Nigeria is about taking off in solar. In Europe, obviously, as I've shown you, we are achieving about 30% of our energy already from these sustainable sources, 50% by 2030. So we know how to do it. We know how to do it with wind. We know how to do it with battery storage. I mean, look at that. If there's a success story, 136% more battery storage year to year compared to last year, 23 to 24. And that trend is actually accelerating. Battery capacity and technology is just out of sight. Electric vehicles, look at it. When people say it's slowing down or we shouldn't buy them or they're bad things, I think consumers think differently. Now, we have made progress. If you look at the carbon footprint here, this is our carbon footprint from our generation. Because of this technology, etc., we have actually a carbon footprint that is now half of what it was from our grandparents. We've become more efficient in decarbonizing these economies. And we're showing that where we do it, it actually makes a lot of economic sense. So what's holding us down is vested interest. It's just selfishness of some of the people who don't want to, because they benefit from the current system. There's no question about that. And the fossil fuel companies have a lot to answer for that. I don't want to mince words around that. So what we need to do is decoupling this growth from this environmental impact that I talked about. And you see many countries are doing that. And they're getting actually benefits from this once more. So we have learned with the crises that we are facing that we can move very fast. We've learned with COVID that we can move very fast when our lives are immediately at risk and take action and work together and do things. But when we got the crisis with the Ukraine, which was a crisis, I think we've also shown that we can move very fast. Germany built its first LNG terminal in less than 12 months, in the wake of the Russian invasion. The EU cut itself off Russian gas. It moved from 40% dependence to 11% in 2 years' time. Portugal reduced its natural gas consumption by 21% in 23. When we have a crisis, we certainly are able to move very fast. What is holding us back now when the crises are actually becoming bigger? We have to enter a new tempo of execution. To some extent, some of this omnibus law in Europe of lowering the regulations, or what you see in the US, lower regulations, lower tax under the Trump regime, might actually result in an acceleration of innovation. It's not all bad necessarily. We've stifled progress by putting too many boundaries around some of the things. So I think the energy shock taught us that we can move fast, just like COVID taught us that we move fast. So hopefully from these lessons we can start going. And Portugal is a great model of that. So what is shaping this transition? Well, just very shortly, 3 things are shaping this transition. I don't have to talk too much about it. But the first one is technology. Wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of electricity in 90% of the global markets. Lithium-ion batteries, for example, have dropped in price 75% since 2015 and over 99% since 1990. And interestingly, that continues, that cost curve. We have a big problem as human beings, that we don't see the exponential issue of the problem between 1.5 degree warming and 2 degrees. We look in the rear mirror to take actions. But we also don't see the exponential cost coming down of technology. Over and over and over, it's wrongly estimated. So any business that I talk to, you take the wrong decisions because you look backwards instead of looking forwards. If you would think exponentially, which people have a hard time doing, we're linear thinkers as human beings. But if you would think exponentially on the cost curves, on technology, on the cost that we would be incurring by not acting, you'd all move 10 times faster than you do today. And each time we find out afterwards, we're losing our competitiveness in doing so. The second force is policy and regulation. Of course, there's some adjustments in policies when you pile policy on policy on policy, it doesn't work. But the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive in Europe, even with the omnibus reforms, it's affecting 11,000 large companies, and soon will be expanded to thousands of companies more. We see the Sustainable Standard Board being implemented in many countries. Regulation is moving forward. We will get the carbon border adjustments in Europe as well around carbon. So technology, regulation, and then obviously economics. The economics are overwhelming. Even in the US, during the first Trump administration or during Biden's administration, 95% of the investments in energy were in green energy. Why was that? Because the economics make sense. If you want to go against the normal economics of this, you'll be bankrupt before yesterday. So there is a momentum. In the car analogy, I would say we're in second gear, which is much easier to accelerate to fourth gear or third or fourth gear than if you would be in reverse. So what story do we want to live in is an important thing. Don't let yourself be fooled by the media, by social media, by the vested order, that this is nonsense, that people don't want this, that we're moving backwards. The opposite. In fact, we're now at a point that I think it is the biggest business opportunity of the century. We're seeing here that not acting will cost us $178 trillion by 2070. 20% of our GDP is at risk. If we're acting, we actually could get a $43 trillion benefit. The 300% return I saw in Unilever is capitalizing on this. I'd love to be a CEO today from a company like that because the opportunity is just immense. Now, China is moving. Obviously, the one that gets the most benefits from this is the one that leads it. We looked at critical technologies for this transition. We found 44 critical technologies. Think about EV batteries, solar modules, 5G, etc. China is leading in 37 of these 44. Why does the US want to slow down China? Why is it so black and white? Because they're waking up. On the one hand, Trump wants to invade Greenland. He wants Canada. He wants to help in the Congo all of a sudden because they're critical minerals. Why does he go out? The Ukraine doesn't care about peace there. He cares about the minerals. Why on the one hand does he care about the minerals and at the same time tries to slow down China? It's because they're behind. It's not that he doesn't believe in this direction, to be honest. He might talk like that because that's what the populists think people want to hear. So easy to tell them it's more expensive, you're suffering. But meanwhile, the policies actually are going quite in a different direction. In getting these critical minerals, which they totally lost the boat on, in getting back some of these technologies that China is leading. But there's a broader picture here I want to talk about. So if you look at Draghi in Europe, talk a little bit more about Europe. I think the Draghi report woke up Europe. 800 billion more in investments. We need to be more competitive. We need to have less regulations, more innovation. We need to make our cost of energy more efficient, invest in our grids. I think they said it very well. Europe has a big challenge. I think Europe now is caught in between China and the US. And since we need to do everything with consensus, we're paralyzed. Hopefully with the Draghi report, with what is going on in the US, we're coming closer together in Europe. I see the UK already getting closer again, which is a good thing. On defense, obviously, we're trying to work with each other. The election in Germany has created a core between Germany, France, and Italy, hopefully now, that makes a more united Europe. We might have to deal with some individual countries that try to boycott still, like a country like Hungary. But this is a moment for Europe to rally and to take the initiative. There's no better way for Europe to use this moment to reindustrialize and accelerate our Green Deal, to embed climate and labor standards that we think are acceptable in the world, to engage China on the areas where we want to cooperate and separate with China the areas where we differ, but have a deep relationship, especially when it gets to greening these global economies. And then hopefully align ourselves with other parts of the world that are much more attractive. America over time is a dying continent. There's less than 5% of the world population there. It's time for us to wake up and strengthen our relationships with Africa, obviously, with LATAM, with Southeast Asia, Asian countries where there is an enormous potential. And again, the port that you built here in Sines, the investments you're making in green hydrogen, etc. I think Portugal is well placed, in my opinion, to play a key role in that modernization of Europe. Above all, in all of this, though, we need a mindset change because, as I've mentioned before, we're moving in the right direction. The issue is not there. The issue is we're just not moving fast enough. We're just going slow. It might feel to you fast, but we're going way too slow. The $2.1 trillion we're investing in green energy now, we've never invested so much, but we need to invest about $5 to $6 trillion to stay around the 1.5 degrees. We might overshoot it a little bit now, but there's no reason why we should not continue to keep that target and try to stay around that. And the issue is that most companies are in the CSR mode, corporate social responsibility. 95% of you issue reports. And if you read the reports, you get tears in your eyes. Less plastics in the oceans, less carbon emissions, less deforestation, slightly better human rights. But when you've overshot these planetary boundaries, as I showed you, less bad is still bad. I used to kill 10 people. I was a terrible murderer. Now I only kill 5 people. Am I a better murderer? It just doesn't work. So we need to change our mindset as companies. We need to move this thinking from being less bad to actually having a thinking that talks restorative, reparative, regenerative. And that is what we call net positive. It's the only essence of the book Net Positive, where we ask ourselves 2 questions. How can you profit from solving the world's problems, not creating them? And is the world better off, yes or no, because your company is in it? Food companies that embrace regenerative agriculture or nature or carbon farming. Real estate that looks at nature-positive solutions. There are buildings now being erected in the north of Europe that are totally carbon positive. Financial services that look at financial inclusion. Start to think regenerative, restorative, reparative. If you look at that, what does it mean? It means ownership for all impacts in the world, not just scope 1 and 2, but you are responsible for everything. If you break it, you own it. If you're in the food business, you're responsible for deforestation as well as, on the other side, obesity, if you want to. Natura, a company in Brazil, takes a broader view of their total value chain, totally based, by the way, on restoring biodiversity. Microsoft goes back to 1976 when they started to make a commitment to take carbon out of the air. They want to be carbon positive. AI is a setback, in a short-term setback for a longer-term benefit. These companies operate for the long-term benefit of business and society. Companies like Danone making a $2 billion investment in regenerative agriculture for the next 5 or 10 years, converting their total value chain. They create positive returns for all stakeholders. Chobani working with refugees, working very closely with farmers, thinking about the planet and future generations. Patagonia is a company that has been given to the planet. Talk about working for a stakeholder. They've literally said, Yvonne Coulon, the founder, I'm giving my company back to the world. They drive shareholder value as a result. Many people are myopically focused on shareholder value, but shareholder value or profits is a little bit like white blood cells. I understand that we need white blood cells to live, but do we live for white blood cells? So I understand that we need a decent return for our shareholders, but it should be the result of what we do, not a myopic focus. Companies that are myopically focused will not last very long, and I think we increasingly see that. The last thing is that they drive partnerships. Here is a photo of François-Henri Pinault with Macron, but we launched in France, for example, the Fashion Pact. The issues that we have right now are so big that you can't do them alone. So you have to work together, especially when the future of humanity is at stake. You have to move from competitive leadership to what I call cooperative leadership. The Fashion Pact, 70 companies in fashion going together. The biggest buying alliance for green energy in Europe, moving together to regenerative cotton. Eliminating single-use plastics from your value chain. These things no individual company can do alone. You can do 30, 40% perhaps alone by being responsible. But the other 50% that we can do today has to come from joint action. So that's what net positive companies do. And these are characteristics of net positive companies. You have plenty of them in Portugal. I don't have to go into that. But you are the 4th largest wind power producer here. You invest in hydrogen. You have banks that are responsible. You have B Corps that really set the standards. You know, you have nothing to be ashamed about. It's just that we need to scale and need to do more of that. So how do we get started? I refer to my book, but it's not that difficult to get started. You need to start with your own company and earn a seat at the table. Then you need to move up the value chain. And that's basically what you're doing, ultimately getting it into culture and values. So for the interest of time, I won't go into this, but it's a normal change process. Companies that follow this are actually very successful. We can now show that companies that are leading or that are moving faster are also being higher valued by the marketplace. In our case, 300% return. But we see the same in many industries, that the leaders actually get rewarded for that. So this is what we do to get started, because it's tough to get going on this. I understand that. But we put this on our websites where there are some simple questions that you can do. And simple questions, I just put 3 up as a starting point, that can give you a score of where you are on this journey and sort of rank yourselves and identify where the opportunities are. Enough tools out there. This is what happened with Unilever. Bold goals, goals for the planet. We didn't set goals to have more profit. Of course we wanted that, and we run the company like that. But we set goals to reach 1 billion more people and improve their health and well-being, to decouple our growth from environmental impact and make all of our products sustainable, to reach millions more people and provide jobs, to be sure that in our whole value chains, half of these jobs go to women and men, to be sure that there's living wages, that human rights standards are applied. That's how we run the business. And what we found was that by running the business that way, we also got good returns as a result. So this is what Rumi said. Rumi said, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself. We have the money to solve these things. This world has over $200 trillion of financial instruments. It's not a question of money. We have more money than we know what to deal with. I've also shown you we have the technology. We know how to address these issues, at least for 80% of it. There's no question. The 20% we have time. We can work a little bit on fusion, on hydrogen, making it more cost competitive. But we have the solution. So what's the problem? The real issue is an issue of greed, of apathy, of selfishness. It's a human issue. This is why this is so important. The real problem is with us. So we talk in our book about what leaders we need. Interestingly, during COVID, we saw a bifurcation in business models. The ones that were short-term focused were doing worse than the ones that were long-term partnership, purpose-driven, had sustainability at the core. But we also saw for the first time a bifurcation in leadership, where people with a stronger sense of purpose, a higher level of empathy. Purpose and empathy gives you an enormous courage, a hard word. Courage is as much heart as it is brain. They were able to inspire others and created these collaborations that led to breakthrough returns. These are the type of leadership skills that were in demand. I call them the ABCs of leadership in this environment. These are leaders that can be adaptive, that's the A. They understand what's happening and adapt their business models accordingly. The B stands for bridging. They're overcoming these divides, not the good guys, the bad guys. No, they're willing to bring them together to look for commonalities. I spent a week in Washington. We spent some time with 30 of the Republican senators and representatives last week. And it's interesting. Whilst there is 10% extreme, I have a hard time with the 80% in the middle is quite aligned with what many of us want. If we were just able to bridge and listen to them, I would argue in many areas the Republicans might actually be more interested than some of the Democrats have been, including on biodiversity, may I say. So you need bridging leadership, and that's the B. And the C is cooperative leadership. People that really put on the issues of humanity, on the issues of the future, for all of us, you start to work together. There's enough areas where you can compete, but at least let's focus on those areas where we can work together. These are people that are system thinkers, to be honest. They understand that when you invest in people, you also invest in climate solutions. When you protect nature, you also have more supply chain resilience. When you address biodiversity loss, you enhance the communities and create stability. They're system thinkers. They're working it a little bit broader. It's also why I'm here at this academic institution, because we need to create more of these systems changes, thinkers. So my point very simply is never ever has the case been stronger for a net positive approach. Never ever has the case been stronger for a different type of leadership. This is a scale well beyond the industrial revolution. It comes at a speed well beyond the technological revolution. And that's why we need to get the right leadership in place to define what the role is that we all want to play in society. And that question is for you. The simple question for you, running companies or doing other things, is the world better off because I'm in it, yes or no? And that only you can answer. It was Wangari Maathai, the Nobel Prize winner from Kenya, who said it very well once. He said, there comes a time when humanity is called upon to shift to a new level of consciousness, what she called to reach a higher moral ground. I cannot think of a better time than now. Thanks for listening. And I'm 12 seconds before my time is over. Here we go.
Can you answer some questions?
Sure, we can if you have more time.
Se alguém tiver alguma questão,
There's some questions.
por favor, pode colocar. Basta levantar o braço e alguém vai dirigir-se até vós com o microfone para poderem fazer a pergunta.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring, intelligent presentation. Of course, it was here music for my ears. My name is Tiago Pitecunha. I'm from Oceano Azul Foundation.
Yes.
There is something that worries me, which is also the energy impacts of digitalization. We know how much energy we need for data centers, and indeed the picture goes quite to the opposite and the contrary to the nature positive vision that you propose.
Yes.
How do you think we will be able to combine everything around artificial intelligence and what it takes in energetic terms and the paradigm that, in a way, your presentation suggests? Thank you.
Yeah, and you're right there, and it has surprised and concerned people, the enormous demand on electricity coming from the burst in AI. Although then you got the Chinese with DeepSeek, and all of a sudden there seemed to be a disruption. I don't know where it's going to net out. But that's why a lot of these AI companies actually are investing in, actually accelerating their investment in greening. I'll talk that in a second. But there's no question that if you want to jump high, which we want to do here, you have to go through your knees sometimes a little bit. Perhaps here we have to go a little bit through our knees and invest in this energy shorter term to have the benefit longer term. We did a study on the benefits of AI in the energy transition and found, including the need for energy that AI has itself, that there will be about 3 to 6 gigatons of benefit. So we're putting 50 gigatons in the atmosphere right now. So that's a sizable contribution, 10, 15% if you want to, will come as a benefit. So there is a net benefit to AI, but you have to go through your knees a little bit. Now, where do we see the other benefit coming in is that the major companies that are investing in AI have all made commitments to be carbon neutral. The Microsofts, the Salesforces, the Metas of this world, the Googles, the Apples, they've all made commitments. And what they are currently doing is billions of dollars are now being spent on nuclear or fusion technologies of the future to do that, because they see the demand and they see the pressure. Billions of dollars are being spent on protecting or regenerating biodiversity. The pledge of 30 by 2030 for biodiversity, for example, I have more confidence in that with the money coming in from these big companies, who have plenty of money, by the way, to find offsets to their shorter term problems than coming in from governments. So on the one hand, you have a higher energy need very short term. On the other hand, they are starting to unlock the markets for carbon, for markets for biodiversity. They're starting to unlock technology. And longer term, there is a significant net benefit of AI. So the cost of transition, not different from if you produce an electric vehicle, will probably have a little bit more carbon emission shorter term. But over a lifetime, there's a big benefit of it. So yeah, you have to go through these humps to get to the benefits. So no despair here, but an intelligent use of it is where the answer is. I hope I got to your question.